the history of American Halloween. My friends, I'm super excited for this one. I did not grow up with Halloween, to be open with you, but I know you guys tend to love this in America. Before I go into that, let me ask you for one thing. If you can leave a like, thank you so much. It's the best way to show support. Now, if you can subscribe, well, in that case, forget about it. You make my day. Have that in consideration. Link for the original video in my description, and well, let's play it.
Hello friends, my name is JJ, and today I thought we would talk about Halloween. As you know, I am quite interested in the various things that make up American culture, and I would say that Halloween has got to be up there in the list of the top 10 most iconically American things of all. Like, check out this little...
I would actually say maybe top 5.
Children's book of all the countries of the world I bought when I was in Japan. When you go to the page about the United States, you can see that they have rocket ship, football, Statue of Liberty, and Halloween. Now,
that's amazing. So basically, football, I tend to agree. Statue of Liberty may be the most iconic, place in America because it represents a lot, and football is so huge. The rocket ship, this makes sense.
Like much of what defines modern American culture, Halloween is a product of two of the most culturally revolutionary eras of American history: the late 1800s, often called the Victorian Age, and the immediate aftermath of World War II. And today I thought it might be fun to talk about Halloween from the perspective of the first era, because I recently bought this very comprehensive book about Halloween in America called Halloween in America. And it has a lot of very cool primary source material documenting what early Halloween was like, as well as documenting the origins of some of our most beloved Halloween traditions, alongside a couple of other ones that haven't quite withstood the test of time.
I'm really curious to see why the pumpkin stuff started happening. That's one of the things I'm so curious.
So I think that Halloween fits the criteria of what most people imagine when they think of a very stereotypically authentic cultural tradition, which is to say it is something that has been around for a long time, it has a lot of well-understood customs and rituals, and it evolved gradually from hazy ancient practices into something that is still relevant to modern times. But that said, I think that when we analyze American culture, it is important that we don't overstate the supposed ancient roots of our modern traditions, just because I think that by virtue of being a new culture in the new world, Americans are not inclined to be a particularly backwards-looking people. So while it is true that a few of the core foundations of Halloween, particularly the date of October 31st, can be traced back to centuries-old practices in pre-Christian Europe, it is also obviously the case
Wait, what?
that most of us who celebrate Halloween today don't really know or care about any of that, and don't really understand the holiday to be honoring a link to that past in any meaningful way. I do think, however, that it is relatively mainstream knowledge that the name Halloween means All Hallows Evening, and that Hallow
Well, I was not aware.
is an Old English word for saint or saintly. We still use a version of this word today when we talk about the hallowed grounds or the hallowed halls of some place we revere. Calling October 31st All Hallows Eve was a reference to the fact that November 1st used to be a Christian holiday called All Hallows Day, so it was a Christmas Eve, Christmas Day sort of thing.
It's still a thing here. November 1st is a religious day.
And the fact that the early Christian church scheduled it on this particular date is usually believed to have been a deliberate effort on their part to displace a pre-Christian festival known as Samhain that was popular in parts of Europe at the time. Parts of Europe like Northern Britain. Northern Britain is home to the Celtic peoples of modern-day Ireland and Scotland, who are often seen as maintaining more pre-Christian elements in their culture than the English, who evolved from an Anglo-Saxon culture that assimilated more comprehensively into Christianity. And as a result, some aspects of the old Samhain festival continue to be practiced in Celtic culture even centuries after most Celts converted to Jesus, including rituals and traditions that were demonized by the more dogmatic English Christians as pagan or occult. And this is a fact that would have been increasingly
So actually, since he is explaining this, things are making a lot more sense to me because Halloween, like I said, is not a thing here, but not a thing nowadays. Is actually a thing for adults and stuff like that, but not the same thing as it is in America for kids. But for us, when I was a kid here in Portugal, November 1st was kind of or mini Halloween because in the morning of November 1st, we also end up going door by door asking for treats, basically. But that was related with what he's saying. It was actually a holiday, a religious holiday, and there is some debate among historians why we do this. Some people believe because there was a big earthquake in Lisbon at one point in November 1st, and after that people end up, being without food, and they start asking door by door who had food to give them, and because of that, kids nowadays do this. But I was reading a book that also said that there is some controversial there. Some people believe that's not the case, and is actually something that goes back in the day to some type of traditions, like he's actually explaining, even from other origins, like Celtic stuff like that.
well known in late 19th
It's actually quite complex, my friend. Sorry for this, but it's interesting for me to understand.
century America, given that one of the great fads of the growing middle class of that time was a fascination with all things occult. During this period, it had become much less taboo to be into ghosts and monsters and other things that would have previously been considered quite anti-Christian and demonic. This was partially a reflection of growing secularism in American culture, and partially just a byproduct of the sort of curiosity and creativity that tends to flow from an increasingly wealthy, literate, and educated society. Now, one problem with being a middle-class person in late 19th century America was that life was pretty boring. This was an era before literally
Sorry, he's from Canada. Canada don't celebrate Halloween.
any form of modern entertainment had been invented, so one of the main ways that people amused themselves was just constantly throwing parties all of the time on any available pretext. So there would be harvest parties and garden parties and Thanksgiving parties and Christmas parties and 4th of July parties and May Day parties and all the rest of it. And in all honesty, this is probably the main reason that Halloween as we know it exists today. Obscure Christian holidays like All Hallows Day were better known in the 19th century than they are now. And
Here, I think it's very important to say this. At least in my country, that's still a very important holiday. So saying that it's forgot is not totally true. Probably in America, right? And also one of the reasons is, for all of the sudden, this video became a bit more serious, my friends. But leave a like if you enjoy this type of content. But basically, here the Catholic Church is the big one, you know. I know in America Protestants tend to be also really, really important. But here in Portugal is not exactly like that. Catholic is actually, I don't know the stats, but I assume most people that are Christians tend to be Catholic here. Of course, there is the other religions, but I believe the Catholic Church tends to keep that holiday.
Thanks to the influence of Celtic immigrants in the United States and growing public fascination with all things supernatural, late Victorian-era America naturally saw an increased awareness of how All Hallows Eve was connected to weird and interesting Celtic cultist stuff. So why not use it as a pretext for another party? Now what's interesting is
And another pause, but what he said there is true, because some people, so this is the day of All Saints, but some people also to say that is the day of all dead people, you know, so it's really fascinating if you go deep into this.
Is that the book says that in the early days, Americans played up the Celtic angle of Halloween a lot more explicitly, particularly the Scottish angle. The author says, the earliest symbols of Halloween, which appear at the turn of the century, include Scottish thistles, tartan designs, and other traditional Scottish themes, indicating its Scottish origins. It's often thought to be an Irish holiday, but the earliest decorations never show shamrocks, leprechauns, etc. These Scottish symbols quickly faded in favor of stuff linking All Hallows Eve to the American harvest season, however, including fall colors like orange and brown, the big full harvest moon, scarecrows, farms, and of course, pumpkins. Pumpkins are a fruit native to the Americas and have been sentimentalized for centuries as one of the great symbolic bounties of the New World, given how big they can grow. There was an old...
Oh, friends, I'm actually enjoying this video a lot because, but I don't know, pumpkins and America, there is a special connection there.
Folk tradition in Europe of making lanterns for festivals out of the crappy little vegetables that they grow over there. And the only reason we make pumpkin lanterns on Halloween is because American pumpkins proved so much better. Jack-o'-lanterns are probably the oldest continuously used symbol of Halloween and appear prominently in Victorian-era postcards in more or less the same form that we see them today. The name jack-o'-lantern is a centuries-old expression referring to...
Jack-o'-lantern? What the hell is a jack-o'-lantern, my friends? What? Oh, friends, I love Halloween, even though if I never celebrated, I love to see how you guys enjoy this holiday, all the kids going around at night. It's really fantastic, and you should be, I know you are, but you should be proud of American culture because a lot of amazing things going all the time.
To a spooky floating flame, spooky floating flames being an old-fashioned scary thing that people don't care as much about anymore. The other big one being the will-o'-the-wisp. There is a story that you often hear these days that says that the name jack-o'-lantern supposedly refers to an ancient Irish legend about a guy named Jack who had to carry around his soul in a turnip. But this is almost...
Honestly, Jack sounds a very Irish name. Someone that actually loves whiskey. I don't know.
certainly a story that was made up in more recent times to justify the tradition, rather than vice versa. As that previous quote alluded to, the Irish like to take a lot of credit for bringing Halloween to America, and today Halloween is a fairly big deal in Ireland. But this is one of those cases where the culture of immigrants in America actually had a bigger cultural influence on the motherland than the motherland did on the immigrants. Sort of like how Italian Americans only made pizza a big deal in Italy after they left, as I discussed in a previous award-winning video.
Wait. Okay, the Halloween I can understand became so popular in America, then Irish, oh, but we created here, now it will become bigger here. But pizza, my friends, what is this true?
So the Victorian party people love to dress up for their soirees, and as a result, the earliest Halloween costumes understood the word in a more old-fashioned way, in the sense of just being vaguely occult-themed dresses and suits and things. The idea of dressing as something specific for Halloween came later. I will note that a distressing lot of these old brochures describe the ideal Halloween costume as being super gay, but of course that was just...
Wait, no, what? Sorry, let's run that part back.
Just being vaguely occult-themed dresses and suits and things. The idea of dressing as something specific for Halloween came later. I will note that a distressing lot of these old brochures describe the ideal Halloween costume as being super gay.
Gay costumes are part of every Halloween party. Weird designs and bright orange contrast. Come on.
But of course, that was just the word people used back then to describe stuff that was colorful or fun. The concept of kids going door to door in costumes to trick or treat seems to be a pretty recent thing, with the earliest documented reference to it, according to the Oxford English Dictionary, being found in an Alberta newspaper from 1927. So if you were my age...
Well, it's actually recent, you know, because... yeah, I mean, my grandpa was born around that time, you know. And if you put it... Wait, is your grandpa young? No, of course not. But the thing is, if you really put in perspective, It's still quite recent.
It is likely that your grandparents were born before trick-or-treating. It is not really clear
Okay. Mine not, but
why or how this particular tradition of handing out free candy to random neighborhood children evolved, though the most common theories are that it's just a sort of ritualized recognition of the fact that by the 1920s, Halloween had become known for tricks and treats. The tricks part probably came about as people realized that wearing a costume at night made it easy to play pranks, pranks being another very common way that people kept themselves amused in the old days. While the treat part was probably just an outgrowth of the sort of middle-class generosity that was becoming more common in the late 19th century. As ordinary people began to have more food and stuff to share with others, traditions of individualized giving became more common. Giving to charities, giving birthday presents to your friends, that sort of thing. So giving candy to the neighborhood children on the occasion of a big holiday seems consistent with this general trend. But if trick-or-treating didn't come about until the 1920s, what sort of Halloween traditions existed before? Well,
That's a
most
great
of them were
question.
pretty party-based. Some of them still exist in some form today, or at least are still present in the popular imagination. Bobbing for apples or playing other apple-related games were common Halloween party activities in the early days of the holiday. Apples, of course, being another fruit associated with the fall harvest season, and a fruit that most Americans had only recently started eating, as we learned in this award-winning video. Sometimes Halloween
Wait, you guys started. Well, I may have to watch that video, by the way. Apples, recently. Recently is like 200 years ago or something, right?
partygoers would eat other traditional autumn-themed foods as well, like corn or nuts or pumpkin pie. But the biggest Halloween thing of all was fortune-telling. Fortune-telling, and especially communicating with the spirit world, was a huge fad among upper and middle-class Americans. And
You know, but this is very interesting because I end up sharing with you the example of my country, but you can find this all across the world. October, specific at the end of October, there is a lot of, crazy spooky things that end up happening back in the day, still today. It's actually really fascinating.
In the Victorian age, and this played a major role in helping Halloween parties go mainstream. In the traditional Celtic folklore, All Hallows Eve, October 31st, was the final day before winter, and the changing of the seasons was associated with the coming and going of spirits, and thus a time in which it was easiest for humans to speak with them. So 19th century Americans seized on this fact and used Hallows Eve as a pretext to gather their friends together and do the various fortune-telling and divination rituals and games that were popular at the time. This included stuff like tarot cards, seances, stuff with fire, and some even weirder routines that are long forgotten now. I was surprised at how many of these old-timey
I really wonder if Native Americans, knew something about this because they had great knowledge.
postcards depicted looking in the mirror as this very iconic Halloween thing. This is a reference to a practice known as scrying, which was when you sort of stared meditatively into the mirror until an image of the future or your dead relatives or the man you were going to marry or whatever began to appear. This fell out of fashion as a tradition as more formal forms of occultism fell out of fashion. But it's worth noting that scrying is also where the cliche of a witch looking into her magic crystal ball comes from. On that note, the spiritualist origins of Halloween are probably the main reason why witches in general are such a common Halloween icon, given witches had long been America's go-to symbol of a creepy person who had rejected Christianity for the occult since at least the time of the infamous Salem witch trials in the late 17th century. Our modern stereotypical image of a witch as an old crone with a pointy hat flying on a broomstick seems like the sort of thing you might have expected the American party favor companies to have just made up for the purposes of selling all of this newfangled Halloween merch. But I was surprised to learn.
You know what? I wonder if people that are very into these spiritual things and stuff like that, and for sure I may have some viewers that are into that, that if they feel different around October, November, since seems like, the old folks believe that this could be the time where you can connect with spirits a bit better.
it has actually
Basically, you have better connection. The Wi-Fi is with all the okay.
been
Bad
the
joke.
Western world's dominant cliche for several hundred years, as you can see in this woodblock print from 15th century Germany, or this early 17th century engraving of a famous witch from England. But despite the long-standing popularity of drawing witches in this way, once again, no one really seems to know why we started doing it. Actually, can I just pause for a second here and make a general statement? I've now made over 500 videos, and if there is one thing I have consistently learned from researching all of these different cultural things, it's that in most cases, no one has any clue where anything weird comes from. If there is a tradition in our culture that seems inexplicable, it is very likely that it is just something that has mutated out of some long, forgotten, obscure thing from hundreds of years ago, and there exists no persuasive historical evidence to help us clearly understand how we got from there to here. There are a lot of quote-unquote educational channels out there that, when faced with an intriguing mystery, will just Google it and then feed their audience whatever BS explanation they found on the first search result. But not me. My promise to you is that I will consistently err on the side of just openly acknowledging the unsolvable mysteries of our culture and avoid.
My friends, this is actually, I love that he is making this point because I love history and specific, I'm going to be very open with you. I love to study religions, specific the one I follow, Christianity. And it's crazy when you go really deep into that type of stuff. First of all, there is more information than people that some people believe. For example, Jesus was not a person, not a person in the sense is not a historical person. Some people believe this. Those people are completely wrong. Most historians tend to agree that it is. But when you go to a lot of the details, the resurrection, etc., it's kind of amazing the things that we know and the things that also we don't know, and that makes history so magic because there is always new things appearing. I love it. Sorry, completely outside of the video maybe, but I love it.
Feeding you these cute little stories that might be intellectually satisfying, but usually have very little hard proof supporting them. If you want to speculate about why you think witches wear pointy hats, go nuts, but you don't need to hear someone else's speculation. Anyway, American Halloween monsters is a topic I am pretty interested in, and I already made a whole award-winning video about the most iconic ones that we see today, like Frankenstein, Mummy, and Dracula. But as I explained in that video, these characters all come from the post-war Halloween era, since they were all based on characters from the various Hollywood movies that had become popular by that time. The canon of American Halloween monsters that you saw in the late 19th century, by contrast, was a lot more limited. Alongside witches and their little black cat buddies, early American Halloween decorations mostly just featured owls, bats, ghosts, and red devils. That last one is a good example of just how secular America was getting by the turn of the last century. Certainly just a few decades prior, having a bunch of illustrations of Satan in your home would have raised a few questions. Skeletons and skulls featured prominently as well. Bones have long been symbols of death in Western culture, and really all cultures for obvious reasons. But it's been suggested that the American concept of whimsical Halloween skeleton people dancing and having fun and all of that might be an outgrowth of Mexican cultural influence on the United States. Mexicans, of course, have their own spooky things themed holiday, the Day of the Dead, which is celebrated.
So I was talking about this, my friends. So the Day of All Saints, some people call the Day of All Dead, it's, again, history is so fascinating.
The day after Halloween,
November,
All Hallows Day, and Day of the Dead also arose from fusing this Christian holiday with various pre-Christian traditions involving the macabre, in this case, those of Mexico's indigenous people. But overall, it is mostly just a weird coincidence that these two major nations of the New World both wound up inventing occult-themed holidays in such close proximity to each other. But yeah, traditional Day of the Dead decorations have long included skeletons, including goofy...
See, this is the thing we don't do it. This is very Mexican, but this never came to my country.
silly ones. And when you look at some of the early American Halloween decorations, it's not unreasonable to suspect that at least some Mexican influence was at play here. These little jack-o'-lantern goblin critters were very popular in the early days as well. A lot more so than they are now, at least. Next to witches, they were probably the most commonly seen monsters on Halloween postcards and toys of the Victorian age. Keeping with the harvest theme, they were often depicted as little scarecrow-like creatures. If you've seen that terrible sequel to The Wizard of Oz from the 1980s, you know that there is a creepy jack-o'-lantern monster thing in that movie, which is in turn based on a character that appeared in the actual book sequel to The Wizard of Oz, The Marvelous Land of Oz, which was written in 1904. Alrighty, so I think that is about all I've got to say about old-timey Halloween. Like I said, however, this is only really half the story. Like most great American cultural traditions, it wasn't until after the Second World War that the holiday really kicked into high gear and headed towards becoming the $12 billion extravaganza that it is today. But that mayhaps is a story for another time. Thank you so much for watching. Do not...
Okay, my friends, thank you so much. Show him all the support. Like I said, the link for the original video is on my description. I thought this was a great video, a lot of history, but man, I understand Halloween quite more than I did when I started watching, so that was impressive. But yeah, thank you so much for watching this with me. Really means a lot. You guys end up staying until the end. Do not forget to leave a like. See you guys in the next one. Bye, my friends.